learners, welcome. Today we'll do interviewing in counseling, which is part of BPCE 145 counseling psychology. As we understand, counseling is an important relationship building and helping profession. Interviewing is an important skill of counseling. When we talk about interviewing, it is considered a major tool for gathering data which helps in reaching to a diagnosis and making decisions about the course of action for the treatment or intervention which we plan for our client. It is a process and not a cross questioning session. Many of the times which we see interviewing, we feel that interview is just asking question again, question on question, but it is not a cross questioning session which we see a policeman asking questions to a criminal. It is questioning basically to understand, and we have to give more open-ended question when we talk to the client in order to understand more detail about his or her difficulties or concerns and his feelings. In interview, we also see that the counselor must be observant. It's not only focusing on what the client is saying, you have to be observant about his body language, his gestures, his postures, the way he is making an eye contact, the way he is sitting, the way he is communicating to you, what kind of language he is using, where does he give the pause in the conversation, whether he is looking at you or he is just looking outside, whether he is continuing with his talk or whether he is having flight of ideas moving from one topic to another topic. So you have to observe the non-verbal communication of the client, the choice of words, the voice, the intonation. Many of the clients may use very flat tone, which is again a indication of psychological illness. The pauses in between which he gives, whether he is thinking before speaking or he is just continuing with the flow or the thought. What kind of speech, the rate of speech the client is having. What are the facial expression? Because some people or some client comes with a very flat facial expression. They do not have any kind of expression on their face, or maybe they may have a very sad expression. So you get to know whether the client is in a happy mood or is a sad mood, or what kind of concerns he may be having, whether he is making an eye contact or whether he is staring or whether he is avoiding eye contact. Many of the times the person, if he or she is not confident, he may avoid eye contact, or if a person is not having the trust in you, they may not make an eye contact. So you have to observe his postures and gestures and other non-verbal communication when you are taking the interview. So interview basically serves a very important function in understanding and doing the psychological assessment and understanding the client's concerns and the problems. Though it is sometimes used as the only method, but for the assessment, it can be used along with several of the other methods. So interview is most widely used clinical assessment method because of number of advantages it has, such as it is very convenient because you can just talk to the person, sit in front, observe his or her body language. Low cost, it does not require most of the efforts or most of the cost. You just sit and talk to the person. It also consider both verbal as well as non-verbal behavior. It is quite flexible, and when we say flexible, it gives you the opportunity to change the questions according to the flow of conversation. So if the client is talking about the family, you can talk detail about the family. If the person is having little difficulty in talking about the family or he is not comfortable, you can be flexible and shift the question which is more non-threatening, like what is his age or where does he live and other kind of things. So it gives lots of flexibility to clinician or a counselor. It also helps the clinician or counselor in building of a therapeutic relationship with the client, as we have seen in the case history as well. So case history, taking interview is not only to collect the information, it helps you to build the rapport, or when we say rapport building with the client, it basically makes the person comfortable. So as a counselor, if you have a good interviewing skills, you can build the trust, you can build that comfort level, and if the client is having the comfort, he feel comfortable in sharing all the information, and if he has shared all the information, you as a clinician or counselor will have a better idea for planning of the interventions and a good reputation or good therapeutic relationship with the client. So when we say counseling interview process, how does this process starts? This particular process of counseling is specified by sequence of interaction or steps. There are number of steps which we have to follow when we start the interview. So the counseling process is concerned with number 1, relationship establishment or a rapport building. As we know that without having a good rapport, you may not get all the information from the client. He may not have trust in you. He may be resistance in the counseling. He may not open up with you. And if he is having resistance, he is not opening up, he is not sharing, your counseling process will be hampered. The second stage which we have to go through is identifying the client's problems and patterns of exploration. Once the client has shared his difficulties, his ideas, his feelings, his attitudes, his concerns, this will give you the idea what is the exact difficulty he or she is going through, and how you can explore, and what kind of repetition happens in his or her behavior, which can lead to planning for a solution to a problem and radiation. And in the last, we also have the concluding with action and termination. So when we conclude, we give the plan of action to the client, we terminate with the hope that the client has learned the skill and he can use these skills which he has learned during the counseling session in the life where he has to face his day-to-day functioning, or where he has to function in his day-to-day life. Now, let's understand each of these stages briefly. The first stage which we talk about is establishing relationship or rapport building. When we talk about establishing relationship, it is not a casual relationship. It's a professional relationship where we have to understand and keep the relationship more professional without having the common conversation or general conversation. This interviewing or conversation has to have the purpose. Without purpose, that will not be a professional relationship building. Let's understand the first stage, establishing relationship and rapport building. It is a very important step in counseling. Establishing a relationship with the client must be achieved early in the counseling process. This will often determine whether or not the client will continue. Because if the client does not have a good relationship with you or the trust with you, he or she may not like to come again for the session. So the counselor must take the initiative in the initial interview to establish a climate which is built on trust, mutual respect, free and open communication, and understanding in general of what counseling process involves. The counselor's attitude and verbal communications are significant to the development of satisfactory relationship. All the counselors' verbal communication skills brought into play. Here, we need to understand that it's not only that you become observant of counselors, of clients' non-verbal behavior, it is vice versa as well. Client is also observing your body language, your attitudes. So if your body language is not confident, the client will lose trust in you, the client will lose confidence in you. So as a counselor, it's very important that you work on your non-verbal and verbal skills, your eye contact, the postures and gestures which you must have learned till now in establishing an effective counselor skills. So, when you talk about these communication skills of a counselor, these include attentive listening. You need to pay attention to the client, what he or she is sharing, instead of planning in your mind what you are thinking or what questions you will ask. So, you have to pay full attention to the client and listen to him carefully. Understanding the feeling with the client. Many of the times, if you are not with the client, if you are not at the same page, you miss out the feeling of the client, and the client may feel little disturbed if he or she is not understood. Quality of the counselor or client relationship influences the counseling process outcomes. So it's very important to understand that your skills as counselors really help in establishing relationship with the client. There are other various factors which are important in establishing the relationship with the client, such as positive regard. When we say positive regard, it is in spite of the client's concerns, difficulties, you consider him as a human being and worthy of affection, love, and respect. You will not judge the client based on his or her qualification. You will not judge the client based on his or her background. You will not judge the client based on what kind of medical issues or psychological issues he is having. So that means positive regard. We have to respect his or her privacy and his or her willingness to share or not share. If he is not ready to share, we will not force and respect his privacy. We also need to see the accurate empathy. So, when we say accurate empathy, understand what the client is going through, what difficulties he is going through, and you have to empathize. You don't have to have the pity, hi, bichara, what he'll do that. So, that is sympathy. So, when you have pity on the client, he'll not relate. He'll say that you are not respecting his feelings. So, empathy means understanding that what the client is going through and what it must be and how it must be for him. We also need to have the genuineness. So, if you are feeling upset about the clients not sharing, you have to be genuine in your feeling and convey that, Rahul, you are coming here for these concerns and issues, but I feel you are not sharing and it is hampering the process. So, if you are upset, if you are not happy about his or her behavior, or he or she has not done his part in the counseling, you need to be genuinely convey that without offending him. These conditions imply the counselor's openness, that is, an ability to understand and feel with the client, as well as value to the client. How much value do you give to the client? And if you give the positive regard, respect, and have the non-judgmental attitude, it will help you to build the trust and the rapport building with the client. Now, the goals of the initial counseling process. Number one is to establish a comfortable and positive relationship. You have to explain the counseling process and mutual responsibility to the client. Many of the client come with this notion that in the counseling, everything counselor will does. All the solution to your problem, counselor will give. So you need to make this very clear that it is the responsibility of the client as well, and you will be working together. You will not be giving the solution, you will not be giving the advice, but you will be helping the client to understand what he is having difficulties and what solutions are available and how he or she can apply. So he has to take the responsibility to resolve his issues. You need to facilitate communication. And when we say facilitate communication, you need to understand if he is having difficulties communicating his feelings, you have to train him for the communication skills as well. Identify and verify the client's concerns that brought her or him to seek for counseling assistance. You need to plan with the client to obtain assessment data needed to proceed with the counseling process. So, when you plan with the client, you need to understand, do you need any psychological testing to understand and get more insight into child's or the client's problem? Do you need any other persons interviewing, for example, his or her family members, his or her teacher, his or her colleague, his or her friend, or any important person in his or her life? Now, let's move on to the second stage of interviewing, which is problem identification and exploration. So, once you have a rapport building, once you establish a good rapport with the client, it will be easy for you to work with him. Why? Because he or she becomes more receptive to in depth discussion and exploration of their concerns. So, now whatever you are ready to give them, they are receptive to listen to you. At this stage, clients must assume more responsibility because it is their problem and therefore it is their responsibility to communicate the details of the problem to the counselor and respond to any questions to the counselor may have in order to maximize counselor's assistance and help. Here, we need to understand many of the client comes with this expectations that counselor will solve or resolve his or her difficulties. We cannot live your life. The client has to understand what is his or her life and difficulties, and it is his responsibility because the subjectivity of pain and difficulty no one can understand, only the client who is going through with that. So he or she has to identify what is the problem and explore the solutions, how these solutions can be used to resolve these problems. The counselor need to distinguish between the surface problem of the client and the actual problem of the client. There are many of the students in counseling, they come to the counselor and say that, ma'am, I'm having difficulty in academics, I'm not able to remember, I'm not able to memorize the things. That is their surface problem. But when we explore, we get to know that they are having so many domestic or family issues. Their parents are undergoing divorce, or their parents are having single parent, or they have lost some of the family member in the difficult time of COVID or other time. So the child or the client may come with the surface problem, which is easy to talk about because this is non-threatening. So you can talk and discuss with the client, and there are actual problem which the client feel hesitant to open up and share, and they are more threatening. So if you ask to someone about their family members or how is the relationship with their parents, they may not come out easily. Why? Because it is quite threatening. So the counselor tries to identify that the problem stated initially is the actual problem, or that there could be another more important underlying issue that needs to be attended to and dealt with to the client. This may be a time for information gathering. The information is gathered under three headings. Number one is the time dimension. This includes the client's past experiences, especially those which he or she may view as influencing experiences of their lives. Another dimension which we need to explore as counselor is feeling dimension. This includes the emotions and feelings of the client towards himself and herself, as well as significant others, including in which group they are going around, what are the attitudes of himself and the group, what are the values he or she is having, and whether these values are matching with the family values or the group values, and how is the self concept of the client. If the child is not, or the client is not having the positive self concept, or he is having the negative self concept, he may have lots of issues. Then we need to explore the cognitive dimension of the client. This includes how the client solves problems, how is the coping style of the client, what he or she is employing to resolve the issues and how he is coping with them. We have to also think what is their attitude and how they are thinking. Is their thinking pattern negative? Do they have any kind of cognitive distortions? The rationality used in making daily decisions. Are their decisions rational or it is based on the spur of the moment? And the client's capacity and readiness for the learning. Is the client ready? Whether he is capable or not. Does he have support system? If he is not having the support system, what are your plans to build him and build his capacity? Now, in these steps, we need to understand and identify and explore different things. Let's see the steps or stages of problem identification and exploration, which are as follows. We have to define the problem as to what is issue clearly. Explore the problem by gathering necessary information and then explore various alternatives in finding solution to the problem. We have to integrate the information that has been gathered from the client and then summarizing it and putting it down clearly for the possible course of action to be taken in resolving the problem. So whatever information you have gathered, whether from the client or from the relatives or the family or the peer, and through different methods, through observation, case history, your interviewing or psychological test, this is the stage where you compile all the information and make meaning of what the client is having the problem and identify the alternative solution. Now, in the stage third, where we plan for problem solving. After all relevant information regarding the client's concern is available and understood by the counselor and the client accepts the need for doing something about a specific problem. Need to develop a plan to solve or remediate the concern of the client, which includes number one, define the problem very clearly, because until unless you have a clear definition of what you are facing with, you cannot think of the possible solutions. So you have to define the problem clearly. You have to identify and list all possible solutions. All these solutions may not be feasible, so first, when we generate the solutions, we never put a break in that. We have to brainstorm and come out with all the solutions which can be possible, and then we explore the consequences of the suggested solution. Suppose if you have a problem and you come out with 10 possible solutions, so all 10 possible solutions will see pros and cons of each solution, and then we choose the best solution which will be for that problem. Then we have to prioritize the solutions. We have to see which solution is having more of the benefits and less of the negative consequence based on your priority needs. The next is solution and application and termination of the interview. The client has the responsibility for applying the determined solution, because as a counselor you may suggest so many things that you have to do this, you have to do that, but if the client is not doing it, the problem will remain same. So the client here needs to understand that it is the responsibility and action which will help in reaching to the solution. The counselor has a responsibility to encourage the clients acting on his or her determined problem solution. So as a counselor, you can encourage, you can guide them. If they are able to follow, reward them. If they are not able to follow, what could be the reason they are not able to follow, and then give them the help and encouragement. During the time that the client is actively encouraged in applying the problem solution, the counselor will often maintain contact as a source of follow-up, support and encouragement. So as a counselor, you don't only have to give the solution or help the client to find the solution, you have to be there to follow up and give the support and become a support system and encouragement, which will help the client to continue with his or her action plan and the solution. The client may also need the counselor's assistance in the even things do not go according to the plan. So if the plan is not working out, then again client can come and discuss it with the counselor, and here the counselor can help and replan the solutions. Once it has been determined that the counselor and the client have dealt with the client's issues to the extent possible and practical, the process should be terminated. Termination is a very important process in interviewing and counseling, because if you do not terminate, if you give termination all of a sudden, the client will again be losing the trust. So and they will not have the closure. So it's very important to give the closure to any process. So counseling is a process and we have to give the closure in terms of termination. So the termination is primarily the counselor's responsibility. Although the client can terminate the session anytime they like, the counselor indicates that the next interview should just about wrap it up and may conclude by summarizing the main points of the counseling process. So before ending the counseling, 1 or 2 session counselors take usually to terminate and to plan for the termination, that from now onwards will not be able to see regularly, or we may not have the interview with you, and now you have learned the skills and you can apply on your own. Usually the counselors leaves the door open for the client's possible return in the event additional assistance is needed. So the client is reassured, and the counselor gives the reassurance that if he or she needs help in future, they can come back, but now whatever skills you have learned, you can apply in your life. Since counseling is a learning process, the counselor hopes that the client has not only learned to deal with this particular problem, but also has learned problem solving skills that will increase the probability of the client not seeking any help or further counseling in the future, and make the client more independent and able to deal with his or her problems of life. I hope with this you have understood different stages of interview which we used in counseling. Thank you so much, and hope to apply these information and knowledge to your practice. Thank you.